for it.
Thank you guys for coming today. We're very excited for another Professor Spotlight event featuring Professor Zach Nowak. He is an award-winning HESA Award recipient professor here at the Harvard Extension School. I took his Intro to History of Harvard last fall just because I heard really good things about it. It didn't count towards any requirements that I needed, and I'm not at all disappointed in spending the money on the class. It was a great class, and he's here to share with us some of those tools that we learned during that class.
Lindsay, thanks a million. I appreciate that. It's really cool to see some people I've had in class before. Roberta, hello, hello. And also Elizabeth is somewhere in there. Cool. Okay. So I'll jump right in, although actually I won't jump right in. Two quick things. One, in my history of Harvard class a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Radcliffe, and basically Radcliffe College was a women's college associated with Harvard, but the Harvard president had to sign their degrees. And I made some comment like, Radcliffe was associated with Harvard, but it was seen as a lesser degree. And somebody put in the chat in the class, somewhere Cody Christensen's ears are burning. Issue. Hey, all I can say about the degree change is Harvard says it can't do anything until students protest enough, and then it changes. So I support that degree and name change 100%. And next week, actually, from my history of Harvard class, we're talking about the history of extension. And I want to say that extension sort of like Harvard College's younger, better looking, more hip, more progressive sibling. So Harvard College sort of crusty and like, oh, we can't change. This is how we've always done things. And extension's like, we can admit women. We can let women study. I mean, women were studying at extension, I don't know, almost 100 years before they were studying at Harvard College. Extension has always been the cutting edge of pedagogy. Extension has always been way ahead of Harvard. I mean, extension was doing like long distance learning decades before Harvard was forced in 2020 to toggle over to Zoom. So be proud that you're extension students and part of the most progressive part of Harvard. Okay, I'll stop with that, but I'm a proud extension teacher. I want to tell you that. Okay, we'll go over to screen 2 for a minute, and I'll pop into the chat this link. And if you want to take out your phones and scan this, feel free to. If you don't, you just want to be along for the ride, that's also 100% fine. This is just a quick survey. Feel free to scan that. Oh, sorry, it's right here. Hold on a minute. Right there. So I want to talk about a number of things tonight, but one of them is food history. Who cares? Why are we talking about the history of bananas? Is that really important? And what can that do as far as allowing us, first of all, to have cooler history, but also more accurate history? Why is food history the key? I'm always hungry, so it helps. Okay, valid. Cool, it keeps you on task. Energy to do things, all right. Yeah, it's kind of important to survival. So it's a tasty topic. Well played. Let's see. What else? Anybody else want to tag in on this one? Yeah, chicken or the egg. Reminds me where we started. Global cuisine. Yeah, it's really easy to look at trends in economics and culture when you're looking at how food changes. There's an environmental component. You have a culture again. Awesome. That's cool. Okay, I want to go on, and this is the I guess the alternate title. So I want to talk about my US food history class. I'll do some shameless plugs for that, but I also want to do this other thing. This is a Jedi technique. You are probably reading journal articles wrong, and I want to show you how to read them right. And I'd say here 30 minutes, you could probably actually do it in 20 minutes, but we'll see tonight. First of all, thank you. Thank you to Lindsay and Danielle and the board of HESA for inviting me. Wouldn't be here tonight, and for doing all the cool stuff that the HESA clearly organizes for extension. It's awesome. I didn't even know about half of those organizations. It's awesome. So this is what I want to do tonight. This is also basically the structure of all of my classes. I usually have like a poll everywhere survey at the beginning. I have the outline. There's a lot of research that if you have an idea of what you're going to hear in a class or how the class is going to be structured, you remember it better. And then I'll have a big question, some sections. So how to taste the past? How do we taste the past? How can we use food to recreate what people's lives were like in the past, especially people that were not like presidents and kings and, you know, dukes and stuff? I want to talk to you about some of the stuff that's in my class, and then I'll pivot over to the highlighting technique that'll allow you to read an academic journal article in 20 or 30 minutes and really to rip the guts out of it like zombies, because all academics are zombies. I'll make an argument for that in a minute. And then at the very end, I'll tell you about some other Jedi techniques that I teach in all of my classes, and then put in some absolutely shameless plugs for my classes too. But this is the big question. How can looking at food, which first of all is just a more interesting thing, I think, than like, you know, presidents and laws and stuff like that, how can a focus on food help us tell a better history? And by better, I mean more accurate, first of all, but also broader with more voices and quite simply more interesting. At least for me, I find food history much more interesting than like the presidents of the United States, quite honestly. So how do you taste the past? I'm a food and environmental historian, and I've written about pizza and about truffles and polenta and Chianti wine, but not from Chianti, from Northern California, and even breweries in Boston, this upper left-hand corner here, the Hoffenreffer Brewery. And it's funny, sometimes when I tell people I'm a food historian, they say like, oh, do you like to cook? And that always makes me chuckle a little bit because I figure, I don't know, like if you met an art historian, would you just assume like, oh, do you like to paint? Or like, I don't know. If you met a military historian, would you say, oh, do you like cavalry charges? Maybe that is. I mean, I guess I do like to cook, so it fits. This is a quote from a French gourmand. And I guess this is sort of what I like about food history, because it lets me tell other stories. There are lots of archival sources about what people ate, even everyday people. And historians work in archives. We have to find bits and pieces of the past that somehow made it into archives. And so the cool thing about going into archives and looking at food history is I can talk not only about rich brewery owners in 19th century Boston, but I can talk about this guy, this working class guy on the left here, who I'm pretty sure is PJ Haggerty, the saloon keep who ran this saloon. And when I write about polenta, I can talk about Italian peasants, not just about kings and dukes and what they ate. When I write about pizza, I can talk about women and their super important contribution, not only to food history, but our shared broader history. What is history? How do historians work? Very, very little of what was written down in the past made it into archives. And historians go into those archives and they find little pieces and they put it together with other stuff that historians have written and make narratives. They tell stories. And that's really important. And historians love documents. But you know what? Archives, guess whose documents archives tend to have? People like this guy, right? Teddy Roosevelt, one of our, I guess, a fellow Harvard grad. And I have to tell you, political history, what most of us learned in high school, this mix of presidents and battles and trees, I find it really dull. And I know it's important. I'm just not interested in it. And an obsessive focus on Teddy Roosevelt leaves out the vast majority of people. And those other people help make the world that we live in today. And that's why food history is cool, because you can go beyond just Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt has like 400 linear feet of archives, of documents in the Harvard archives. And you could really easily tell Teddy Roosevelt's story. I can take anybody on this call and give you 2 weeks of lessons on how to write historical narratives in Houghton Library. And in 6 months, anybody on this call could write a decent biography of Teddy Roosevelt. Because like every piece of paper the guy ever touched in his whole life is in Houghton Library. But here's my question. How about Teddy Roosevelt's butler? How about his life? How do we figure out his life? In the archives, some people are yelling at the top of their lungs like Teddy Roosevelt. And some people are using what my mother would call inside voices. And some people whisper. And if you listen really carefully, you can hear them whispering. Teddy Roosevelt's butler is in there, but you have to really listen. And other people are silent in the archives. Other people are not recorded in the archives. So this kind of stuff, man. This is just one of Teddy Roosevelt's archival collections. 354 feet. Archival collections are measured in linear feet. That's how many documents there are. This is the equivalent of shouting the archives. This is the kind of stuff I use to write most of my stuff. So in the upper left-hand corner, and then going clockwise, there's an oral history with a winemaker from California in the 1950s. In the middle top is a record of wine served in Harvard College in the late 1800s. There's a really cool poster from the 1980s advertising Italian wines. The bottom right is the 1904 World's Fair. It has some Chianti bottles. They aren't visible here. There's a letter, and then there's also a wine bottle from 1920s. Which is a historical source and is in an archive. But I also use stuff like this, and students use stuff like this in my US history class. When you write your research paper, you're going to mostly write it with cookbooks and recipes. Like this one, I can recognize my mother's handwriting immediately, the top right. And also menus. These are 3 really awesome sources that you can use to recreate the past of people who maybe haven't often been the objects of historical texts. So that's sort of the overview of how you can taste the past, how you can go back and taste the past. And I want to talk about my class a little bit. This is it's like the first American cookbook, I guess you could say. And a woman named Amelia Simmons published it in 1796 in Connecticut. And she calls herself an orphan. And there's a recipe here, and you've seen behind me, I'm sure, that I have a recipe behind me. So let me just paste this in. If you want to check this out later, feel free to. In the chat, I'll paste in a link to it. The Library of Congress has a copy. So what do you put in apple pie if you make apple pie? You know, there's the saying, as American as apple pie. So let's look and see, what does Amelia Simmons put in here? And how American is this dish? And for me, it's a little bit ironic. So here's the page that talks about apple pie. Remember, 1796. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay. So there are some S's that look like F's in here. So stew and strain the apples. To every 3 pints, grate the peel of a fresh lemon and add cinnamon, mace, rosewater, and sugar. And then there's a recipe or a reference to the pastry recipe here, number 3, and that has butter, eggs, and wheat flour. So the interesting thing is, if you look at this recipe, right, as American as apple pie, there are 0 things on this recipe that are that originally were domesticated in North America. Not apples, that was Central Asia. Lemons, also not. Cinnamon, mace, Southeast Asia. Rosewater. I mean, there are some roses in North America, but not this kind. Cane sugars from Papua New Guinea, probably, or Malaysia. Butter is from domesticated cows. That's also Afro-Eurasia. Eggs, wheat flour, all these things are from somewhere else. And I think that's a really cool thing about food in the US, is that a lot of it's from somewhere else. This is the beginning of the class. Talk about the Columbian Exchange, so-called. And it starts out with, first of all, why did Pizarro conquer the Incas? I know that seems like a random question for a food history class, but how is that possible? This is the first question, and it really has a lot to do ultimately with food history and the fact that the continents have axes. When I first saw this graphic, I thought, well, so what? Right, but if you domesticate something like wheat right under the R in Eurasia, it can spread really quickly along that line. Whereas if you domesticate something in Africa or in one of the Americas, it's really hard because it has to go across a lot of different ecological zones. Again, this doesn't seem like it has anything to do with food history, but it does. It has a huge impact because after 1492, we get this, this exchange of foods. Exchange of foods, exchange of animals, exchange of diseases, and also, in this graphic here totally hides this, exchange of types of labor, like slavery. My class also talks about industrialization. I think if I ask people on this call, hey, where did industrialization start? My guess is you probably would say in the textile mills in England, right? And that was sort of the accepted knowledge about, I mean, that's what I learned when I was in high school. Like, that's where factories get started. And in fact, in 1945, a scholar named Eric Williams said, no, it wasn't. Industrialization started with sugar production in the Caribbean. Already in the 1600s, there are factories, huge capitalization, with really segregated, obviously segregated workforce, but also distinctions between labor. Timing was really important. Massive international supply chains. And he said this was the money, basically turning black bodies into sugar, into money. And this provides the money for industrialization. So like a totally different idea. Someone in the beginning wrote that food history can give us another view at economics. This is how food history shows us, no. What you've learned about industrialization is totally wrong. This is the cola plant, and it's indigenous to West Africa. And Africans noticed that when you put it in water, in sort of stagnant water, it makes it seem fresher. And so ship captains that were transporting enslaved people would put it in the water on the ship to make that water seem fresher. And this was transplanted to the Caribbean, and African descended people in the Caribbean continued to use it as they had in Africa. This was combined with molasses, and it was sold mostly by enslaved women in markets. And later it was combined with another plant, the coca plant, and it was commercialized on an enormous scale. And so Coca-Cola, the most American of drinks, perhaps, Coca-Cola is the unfortunate heritage, or the fortunate heritage of an absolutely abysmal system of labor. And so this is also a way that U.S. food has a lot of contributions from all kinds of different people, and you can see contributions in food. Another really cool example of this is what's called the black rice debate. So we don't usually think of rice as being a major U.S. export, but in the colonial period, rice from Georgia and the Carolinas was an enormous part of the economy, absolutely enormous. And these rice plantations were run with enslaved labor, but these plantation owners often tried to get enslaved people from specific parts of West Africa, where there already was experience with using tidewater rice cultivation. And so this system was not just European knowledge, it also had a huge component of traditional knowledge from West Africa. Sometimes people ask you that question, if you could like have dinner with anybody in history, who'd you have dinner with? And I wouldn't have dinner with anybody. I want to be on the Great Plains the day that the first native person got up on a horse and chased down a buffalo with a bow and arrow. I mean, that for me is like one of the absolute most amazing things that ever happened. That horses, which were native to Afro-Eurasia, come over with the Spaniards and they get loose, and wild horses make it up to the Great Plains, and native people learn how to ride them and completely change their lives and go from being, in many cases, horticulturalists, gardeners living in river valleys, and they all of a sudden can tap into this massive source of calories, and they completely change their lives and become nomads. And this is the natives that Europeans encounter when they get to the Great Plains. And I just think this is one of the most amazing stories in history, bar none. So we talk about that as well. The landscape on the left is really easy to control, and the landscape on the right is really hard to control. And so in US history, especially when there was slavery, people ran away. They ran away from being enslaved, and they went to places like the Great Dismal Swamp on the right and had relatively egalitarian societies and stayed away from people that wanted to enslave them or people that wanted to tax them. These are really cool spaces to talk about in the class too. This is the Chicago Board of Trade in 1898. And this is often credited with being the place that futures start, like futures on different grains, pork belly futures. But it was also this invention, the grain elevator, which had a huge impact on that. And it's a story that I think is a really cool one. It doesn't look like it from these black and white photos, but that these two inventions make it possible to have a huge flood of grain from the Great Plains flow through Chicago. In 1957, my grandfather and my grandmother went over to their friends, the Hausers, and had a meal. And they came back, and my grandfather said to my mother and her sister, "Oh, we had this really interesting meal tonight." "Oh, really? What was it?" "Oh, it was like bread, but flat. And on top of it was tomato sauce and like salami." "Really?" "Yeah, it was like hot. Oh, and melted cheese too." And this was the first time my grandparents had ever encountered pizza. And then they started ordering it Friday nights. And my grandfather, who was Irish German descended, sort of pretended he didn't like it. "Oh, I don't like this Italian stuff," right? There's a sort of rejection of American ethnic food by older immigrants. And so they would order a medium pizza, but he always had a piece or two. So finally they ignored him, even when he said he didn't want any pizza and ordered a large. It's amazing to think of a time in the United States when pizza was not super popular, but it wasn't that long ago. It also wasn't that long ago that Kraft cheese could sort of pass itself off in Bon Appetit, in like a pretty high level magazine, as being real Italian. What happened in the last 30 years to make Kraft cheese sort of looked down upon? What about booze? This is the very end of the class. We talk about booze. And I have students read, I'm shameless about this, an article I wrote about Chianti wine in Northern California, and an article about Boston breweries. Americans have had a troubled relationship with booze, and that's had a lot of interesting historical effects. Okay, so that's the outline of the class. I want to move on to number 3. So basically, you're reading academic articles wrong. and it's not your fault. Nobody told you how to do it, and nobody told me how to do it until my second semester of graduate school at Harvard. And then one of my friends, not any of my teachers, but one of my friends said, "Oh, man, you can't read an article. You got to process an article." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he showed me this technique. But basically, you have to remember that academics are zombies, or they're like zombies. They're very slow moving. They exhibit herd mentality. And most of all, they love big brains. They absolutely love big brains. And academics, when they read articles, they want to rip the guts out of the articles. They don't want the sinews and they don't want the cartilage. They want the guts. The script is always the same. Can I just pause for a minute? Does anybody like zombie movies on this call? Yeah. Juan? Yeah. Okay. Juan, can you tag in for me? Can you unmute?
Yeah. There's
You
some
ever
of the
seen
best.
the original zombie? It's Night of the Living Dead. Have you ever seen the black and white one?
And not the black and white one. The first one in color, like that was probably what kicked it off for me.
Okay, so I want to ask you a question, Juan. So at the beginning of the zombie movie, there's like the 7 minutes where everything's cool, right? The sun's out, it's all good, and then what happens?
Like the main character doesn't even realize what's going on, or everything is already going on around them, and all hell breaks loose. Pardon my language, but it's like it just implodes and people are
All
running
hell breaks loose.
scared. Yeah.
Okay, what next? What next? So everybody dies immediately.
So either you got the runners, the slow walkers, the chasers, like the biters, it just or like Resident Evil, which is the like oh my God, I know this. I just watched it the other day. The and anywho, but so there's different types. So if you're in that scenario, you gotta figure out which one, which scenario, what type of zombie you're fighting, and then work your way backwards, and then you can pretty much figure it out.
So like 10 minutes, everything's cool. Then all hell breaks loose. You got this cool scene where people are just getting ripped to pieces. But then what happens with the protagonist? Where does the protagonist go?
He ends up either at a bar
right,
with his friends, or in
Yeah.
a basement, or somewhere in a car. It's always a
or
car.
a mall, right? And
Night
they
of the
like
Living
hammer
Dead.
up they're putting the boards up on the walls,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then there's two possible endings. What are the endings? How does a zombie movie end?
Well, all right. So in a optimistic way is like it always cuts scenes to like they finally found a cure or whatever. You're gonna go with the cure or with everybody dies minus the main character, and then there's part two of how like the prequel or something, and then part 2, 3, and 4 like 28 days, and then 28 weeks later you got the runners. I'd rather deal with slow walkers. That's a lot easier. Or you have to fight other organizations and gangs. So basically just you got to buddy up with somebody real quick. So
Awesome. Thanks, Juan. I appreciate it. So what's the story with zombies here? What relevance does that have? Academic articles are just like zombie movie scripts. There's only kind of one way a zombie movie goes. Like what Juan just outlined is kind of how every zombie movie goes. There's just a formula, and there's like variations on a theme, like how you're fighting the zombie, or if it's a virus, sometimes it's a fungus, like in the new a new one. You might be traveling around the world, they might be slow, they might be fast. But basically, the basic formula of a zombie movie is always the same. And I want to tell you that the basic formula of an academic article is always the same. They're very formulaic. And once you see once you can see like the skeleton below the flesh, then it's really easy to read those much, much quicker and much more effectively. Okay, I'm going to toggle back over here. So here's the Day of the Dead, George Romero. All of these are the same. The structure is very formulaic. And here's a great thing. You don't have to read the whole article, or you can skim 22 out of 25 pages. And I want to show you how to do that. So first of all, this is the structure of a typical journal article right here. So you got one part at the beginning, that's the introduction. There might be something called an anecdote or a vignette. And that's like For example, I wrote a paper on railroads in the late 1800s, railroad stations, and it starts out on June 24th, 1873, Julian Betts got off a train from Minneapolis to St. Louis. As he headed towards the exit, he figured he was scot-free, but then two policemen apprehended him. There's something at the beginning that sort of draws your interest, right? Then there are these two things: the argument, which you might call the thesis, and then what I, as a historian, call the historiography, and what most other disciplines call the literature review. And that's just telling you, like, okay, on this topic, what have other scholars written? There always has to be this at the beginning of an article. This is how every article begins, more or less. And after that, it's all the evidence. And each of the body paragraphs have a topic sentence. They have some evidence. There's some analysis, and then there's a transition sentence. And then there's another paragraph that has a topic sentence and evidence and analysis and transition, and on and on and on. And then there's some sort of conclusion at the end. You don't need to read most of that. You just need to read the introduction really, really well. And in fact, I would say if you're going to spend 45 minutes on an article, probably 20 minutes should be on the first 3 pages. You got to slow way down, and you got to look for very specific things. And these are the things you have to look for. People who have taken my classes will tell you that I have a somewhat insane, very specific highlighting system. And I use orange highlighters to highlight the argument. I even do this when I'm reading by myself. Orange when I find the argument, blue when I find the literature review, and then yellow or pink for everything else. I always use these 3 colors. I always have 3 highlighters with me when I read academic articles. Because these are the 3 things you really need to find in an article. So, and I'll put in an essay that I wrote about how to do this with some examples. So let's do it. I'm going to share an article here in the chat, and you can open it up if you want to follow along, or just follow along however you want. By Nathan McClintock. It's about urban agriculture. That's not really important. It's just my example for today. So let's dig into this article. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. So here's the first page of the article. You were probably just blowing right through this, and you need to slow down. And the first thing you need to look for is the argument. Okay, what is the argument going to start with? What I call an argument hot phrase. Here are 4 examples. In like a sentence or two, what is the main thing this person is going to argue in this paper? What are they going to try to prove in this paper? And these phrases sometimes can be super obvious. On the 20th of October, every single year, I go to Mount Auburn Cemetery with an armful of white roses, and I put a white rose on the grave of every scholar that started their argument with, I argue that, because that makes it super, super easy to find. But they might also say, I contend that, our claim is that, this article demonstrates. There's a bunch of different ways to start it, but you have to look for these phrases. And when you find them, and I'm going to zoom in here, when you find them, triple highlight them in orange. I actually have a very elaborate highlighting system with widths of highlighting too, but I won't get into that tonight. I want to seem too neurotic when I'm pitching my classes. When you see, I argue that, highlight it in orange. Highlight that phrase, triple highlight it, and then highlight the rest. Cool. The thing about this is not every article will have an abstract. A lot do, but historical articles often don't. The author will often state the article a couple times in the first 2 or 3 pages. And so you got to go through those first 2 or 3 pages and be looking for a restatement in a longer way of the article. Okay, cool. Let's do that. Here's page 2. And I found yet another time that Nathan McClintock starts a sentence with, I argue that. And then there's even a second time. He says, further, I contend that. Cool. So let's zoom in. This is what I do when I see that stuff. I triple highlight the hot phrase, I argue that. And then I sort of lightly highlight the rest of it in orange. Why orange? Because the day that I made up this system in June 2018, I decided arguments were going to be orange, and I can't change it. Now it's fixed. Nathan McClintock has 3 different statements of the argument, very explicit. Sometimes it's kind of hard to tell what the argument is because the author doesn't start it with, I argue that. Just you highlighting a couple different things in orange and then trying to figure out some synthesis. Trying to figure out, okay, if these things are maybe the argument, maybe this is like what the overall argument is. And then you do the rest of the processing. And then you come back and say, okay, this is what the author's argument is. I know that it seems like you're going way slower because you got to go back and forth between highlighters and you got to look for these really specific things. You are on page 2 and the other person who's reading next to you, the same article, is on page 11. But you are way ahead of them because you've already pulled out something that's really, really important, the argument. Okay, second thing, take out your blue highlighters. We got to look for the literature review. When academics write, they don't just write into the air. They always have to say what other academics have already written about a topic. And it's really important that you also know that. The literature review is basically a summary, a short summary of what other authors have already written on a topic. And once again, the literature review starts with literature review hot phrases. For many activists and scholars, critical social scientists increasingly argue that. So Nathan McClintock is saying, look, I know other people have written about this topic. And in fact, I'm going to tell you what they've said too. What are lit review hot phrases? Here's a bunch of examples. There are lots of these, but there are not an infinite number of these. And in fact, you can sort of see scholars, there are a bunch of theories, scholarly interest, scholarly discussion. They're just variations on the theme. So when I find lit reviews, I triple highlight the hot phrases, and then I highlight the rest of it in blue. Remember, there might be multiple places where you have a lit review. So here's a little tiny slice of it in the abstract, but is Nathan McClintock going to come back to this somewhere? Yeah, on page 2. Back to page 2. When you find those hot phrases, triple highlight them. So the ones here are scholarship on urban agriculture, scholars from a range of disciplines, more critical camp of social scientists. When you see these, triple highlight them in blue, and then fill in the rest in blue. Again, there's a bunch of ways to say this, but there isn't an infinite number of ways. Bam. So that's page 2 of the article. One other thing before you get going into the rest of the article, and that's structure. And so in historical writing, you don't get this much, but in social science writing, you get it a lot. What about structure? Does the author tell you how this paper will be structured? Is there like a mini table of contents of the article? Yeah, McClintock is very explicit. First, I'm going to do this. Then in section 2, I'm going to do this other thing. Then in section 3, I do this other thing. Then I'm going to summarize this stuff. And then I'm going to review and do this other thing. Bam. Same thing here. When you see those hot phrases for structure, highlight the hell out of them. What do you do after that? You know the argument, the main argument of this paper. You know basically in a very skeletal way what other scholars have said about this topic. And you have an outline, like a little mini table of contents of what this article looks like. From now on, all you need to do is, what I do is I read and highlight the first sentence of every paragraph. If this is a well-edited journal article, all you should need is the first sentence. You can really skip the rest of it. And this will take you maybe 40 minutes. But remember, a lot of your time is on the first 2 or 3 pages. You really got to dig down deep into those first 2 or 3 pages. This is what my first 2 or 3 pages of this article look like. So here's blank. This is what it looks like when I'm done with it. Where you see orange is the argument. Where you see blue is the lit review. Where you see yellow is the structure, the opening anecdote, name of the author, etc. So at the end of this, you have a half page, maybe 3/4 of a page with this on it. I just put the name of the author, last name of the author, and the title of the article, underline it. What's the argument? Either exactly just transcribing what the author's written, or I try to synthesize it, give some notes on the historiography or the lit review. What is the data? Did this person go to an anthropology study where they talk to people? Is it in the archives? Is it government data? What's the structure? And then 10 or 15 bullet points, no more, no more. You don't need any more than this. In fact, this is exactly what you're going to use when you talk in class. This is really what you need. You don't need pages 4 through 25. Not much. I mean, a couple of the big ideas, but that's it. Some people would think, oh, this is cheating. You cannot get a PhD if you don't do this. There is no way to read all the stuff you have to read. You have to process it. This is what everybody that is a PhD after their name does. There's also a way you can do it with books, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, I'm going to put in my essay about how to do this in the chat. If you want to download a copy of it, go for it. It's a PDF. And at the end of the essay are some examples of how to do this as well. Okay, final part. I want to talk about a couple other what I call Jedi techniques that I teach in my classes, and then some shameless plugs for my classes. I have multiple different classes. I teach history of intro to Harvard history, US food history, urban agriculture. They have different titles, but every single class is how to do college. I'm never going to be the super famous Harvard researcher, but my thing that I think I do well is to tell you how to do college, to tell you the ways that you can make your life way easier. And being able to process a journal article is one of those, but it's not the only one. What is peer review and why does it matter? How can you use Google Scholar not Google Scholar, Google Books in a really cool way to avoid having to go to your library and pull out that book just to see if it has one page on X? This book has 600 pages. And my students for the Harvard history class read it in 4 hours because they don't read it. They process it. It's very similar to the way that you process an article, and you basically hone in on the things that you really need and you skip the rest. And in 4 hours, not only do you take way less time with the book, but you know it way, way, way better. This isn't cheating. There's no extra points for reading all the words, none. You only get points in grad school and in college for knowing the ideas, not for reading all the words. I am really focused on breaking things down into systems. What is a lit review? How does it work? Lit reviews are just circles. They're all blue circles. If you want to know more about it, come to class. I also teach a little bit of theory. It's called actor network theory. And it basically talks about how, there's a big debate about agency. How do people make things happen in the world? How do people act and make historical change? And actor network theory says it's not just people, it's like webs. And it's webs of people and ideas and also stuff. I mean, I couldn't be here tonight and do this if I didn't have Zoom, if I didn't have a computer, didn't have internet. I used to, for professional attire, I'd have to come into class and look not like a goofball. And that means I have to have a watch, at least to me. And I used to have dress pants and a shirt. Now I just need a shirt. I don't even need dress pants anymore. This talk tonight was possible also because Danielle and Lindsay coordinated it, and HESA put it together and sponsored it. So this is another thing I like to teach, a little bit of theory, but to try to make theory accessible. How do you write a body paragraph? I get really, really, really specific and have my students do exercises on how to learn how to write a body paragraph in an essay. Because that's the meat of an essay, right? There's just over and over and over all these body paragraphs. What's in them? And I break it down and say, okay, the red is the topic sentence, and the purple are the pieces of evidence, and the black is the analysis. This is me writing my dissertation. Every one of those little boxes is 350 words. I think I started maybe a month after I started doing my dissertation, doing the boxes thing. Do you want to write with a lot less stress and write more effectively? I can teach a great technique that's easy to do. All you need is a piece of graph paper. That's it. Zotero. If I have a minute at the end, maybe Danielle and Lindsay let me do a quick Zotero demo. We'll see. Zotero is awesome. You were all awful at citation, like really bad. And guess what? So am I. I'm really bad. If you gave me my book and were like, put a gun to my head and said, cite this with a Chicago style footnote, I'd be like, okay, is it Nowak, Zachary, or Zachary? No, is it a comma or a period? I can't remember. Yeah, Zotero makes it easy. It's also a great database too. And I teach students how to use it in my class. Okay, 2 classes I'm teaching here. I'm gonna put a whole bunch of links in the chat. Hold on a minute. Some of them work, some of them don't, oddly. My Canvas site for Urban Ag doesn't seem to work right now. Urban Ag. I won't teach you how to plant better potatoes, but we can talk about a lot of theory about what Urban Ag does and doesn't do. Food production, it's always a goal of urban agriculture projects like school gardens. It's rarely the #1 goal. Lots more Jedi techniques in here. I promise you, if you take this J-term class, those 3 hours will fly. I promise. And lots of digs on cats. I wouldn't say that I hate cats. I would say that I loathe cats. The other class in the spring, more than just a meal. American food, a global history. Food history, same thing. Jedi techniques, how to write a research paper, and even more jokes about how cats suck compared to dogs. And finally, this is actually one of my friend's classes, Chloe Chapin, but it's awesome and still has some slots, and you should check it out. I, Us, and Them, How Clothing Creates Individuals, Communities, and Enemies. Really, really cool class. And another person like me who is very focused on teaching you how to do college. Really, really cool. Lindsay, man, I got great cat jokes too. I'd love to tell some cat jokes, but I'd like Lindsay and Danielle, do I have time to do a quick Zotero demo? Can I do that?
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes. So
cool. Oh, 10 minutes, I can tell a cat joke then. Okay. So there are 2 cats in a swimming contest. One cat is named 1, 2, 3, just the name of the cat. And the other cat is named 1, 2, 3. Which cat won the swimming contest? Anybody know? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The 1, 2, 3 cat won because the 1, 2, 3 cat sank. I don't know if I'm gonna get invited back.
Do you need to speak French to understand that one?
Yeah, sorry. There's a level of French needed for that. By the way, this just goes to show the eternal verity that cats can definitely swim, but they can't swim indefinitely. All right, I'm going to turn off this for a second, and I'm going to show you one other thing. I'm going to show you Zotero really quickly. So let me pull Zotero up. Okay. You can still see, you can see my Zotero screen, right? Lindsay, can you see it? Okay, cool. So this is Zotero. Don't be intimidated by it. It's a little database, goes on your computer. It's free, and it lets you take something like HOLIST, like this, And if you were to look for this book, Truffle, A Global History, a great book, which I recommend highly to all of you. It gets rave reviews from my mother. You get this book in HOLIS, right? You look up the thing, and then up here is this little icon. And if you have Zotero, you have this little icon, and that's a book icon, and you just click that. And what happens? Well, if you go back to Zotero here, you can see you get a little icon, Truffle, A Global History, and over here is all the stuff that you need to write a footnote or write a parenthetical reference. Cool, okay. Well, does it work with articles? Well, I'm glad you asked, Zach. It does. If you were looking up another awesome article, let's see, Theorizing the Natural Archive by Zachary Nowak, great article. It has at least 2 readers, I know for a fact. So once again, you go and look it up through HOLIS. And then over here, notice there's a little piece of paper with lines on it. That's the icon for a peer-reviewed journal article. And if you click on that and you go back to your Zotero thing, something really cool happens. First of all, you get the little icon and the name, and you get all this stuff, all the stuff you need for parenthetical reference. And bonus prize, if you open it up right here, you get the article. You just double click and it pops right up. Right? That's kind of neat. So you got it in your database. If I ask you, when you download an article through like JSTOR, where do you, okay, Acrobat's restarting. If you download something from JSTOR, where does that PDF go? It probably just goes in your downloads and you can never find it again. But I can find it again because it's all in Zotero right there. Okay, so this is cool. You got this database. All right, that's awesome. But let's do something practical. Like you're writing a paper. Here's my little practice essay, right? And I want to put in a parenthetical right there. Zach wrote a book about truffles. Now I want to cite my book, right? And you go up here to Zotero, the little tab, and you say add edit citation. And it opens up this little thing and says, okay, what style do you want? And you can use any style, APA, MLA. I like Chicago, but we'll use, here we are, Harvard. Why don't we just use Harvard? Okay. Oh, let's use the note one. So you tell Zotero, I want to use this style. And what do? Well, actually, no, I don't want to put in, I want to put in a parenthetical. Let's just use MLA. Okay, so it says, what do you want to cite? You click on that. Okay, we'll just have to do a footnote, fine. So it puts in a footnote. If you go down the bottom, it has truffle. Now, if you go to the bibliography, you just say add edit bibliography, and anything at all that you put in a citation to, it adds it in the bibliography. So let's do my other article on ice cores. Add edit citation. We have that article we pulled in before. Hit OK. Second one. And look, it adds it immediately to the bibliography. But let's say, okay, we want to cite a specific page. We're going to cite that truffle book again. Add edit citation. Truffle book, page 62. Bam. Third one. Right down here, of course, your footnotes are absolutely perfect. And if you go back at some point, you know, when you're writing a paper, sometimes you cut stuff. So if you cut that reference to the Natural Archive article, look, it's still down here. But if you go up here and just hit refresh, Zotero says, oh, that's not in there anymore. I'm going to take it out. This is a super, super easy way, first of all, to keep track of all your PDFs, but also to make picture perfect citation, because you all are awful at citation. And so am I. And so are your professors. When I read colleagues' papers, my God, they can't cite to save their lives, because there are a million different styles and they all differ by like where the date is or the period or whatever. So anyway, this is another thing I teach in my class and is absolutely awesome. Woo, 26. Okay, I did it. Can I take questions, Danielle and Lindsay? What should I do here? I can tell more cat jokes too.
If you're okay with it, we've got still 4 minutes for questions, and it looks like Elizabeth is raising her hand.
That's a veto and more jokes, just to be absolutely clear. It's not a veto. Okay.
No more. No, that was the last one for sure.
All right, Elizabeth, go right ahead.
Hey, everybody. I just more wanted to give a plug for Zach's classes. I took one about 1.5 years ago. It was the history of Harvard. It was fabulous. But I actually just graduated in May with my master's, and I could not have done it without the skills I learned in your class. So Zotero was fabulous. And of all things, I ended up writing a biography on my great grandmother, and the only primary source document I had was her cookbook. written in her own hand. So the subjects you teach are wonderful, but more the skills that we learned it was invaluable. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I just sent the $50 on Venmo. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Lindsay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say kind of the same thing. The skills that we learned in that class, I've used them in almost every class since then. I think I'm trying to think of what class I might not have used them in, and I don't know if there's actually one I haven't used it in. I'm going to take an accounting class in the spring, so maybe I won't use it there. But I took a very condensed J-term class that it was a government class. It was a history class disguised as a government class, and I used all of these skills there. We read a huge book, and so I followed along with the tools for how to read this monograph in 4 hours, and I felt like I knew a lot more about that book than my classmates did, and some of them had notes about specific pages, and I was like, you're going about it the wrong way. And the professor and the TA is also a doctor. I think she's a doctorate of history too, but they were impressed with the writing too, and it's because I just followed along with the stuff that we learned in class. And the other thing, Zotero, Zach told us that it will save you so much time that you can learn another language. In that, within 1 year, I completed the Duolingo Italian course. And then they moved the goalposts, so now it's not marked as complete anymore, but I think within a year and a half I will have completed the Duolingo Italian course, because Zotero saves that much time that you don't have to waste on making your citations and storing your documents.
Thanks, Lindsay. Peter asked a question. The Urban Ag is just a J-term class. Sorry. The U.S. food history is in the spring, but yeah, Urban Ag is just J-term. Other questions or jokes making fun of cats?
No joke. Zach, it's Roberta, and
Roberta.
I've missed you. I have forgotten a little bit about the joy in your voice, in your smile, and I'm glad to have a refresher course. Thank you, Lindsay, for telling me about this link. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful holiday.
You
and
too, Roberta.
just
Good to see
sending
you.
lots of love and wishing that I could be eating that apple pie that's behind you on your school. Thank you
Thanks,
again,
Roberta.
Zach. It's good to see you again.
Ditto.
Well, I think that takes us to 1:30. So I will just say, Dr. Nowak, thank you so much. That was incredibly insightful and engaging, except for the terrible cat joke, which we'll all just agree to forget forever. But yeah, no, thank you so much. I know that these are skills that are so incredibly important, and that everybody will benefit from. So thank you. And to everyone, thank you for coming. This is our last event of 2023. So yeah, thank you all for joining us, and keep an eye on our social media and our newsletter for things coming up in the next term. And thank you again, Dr. Nowak. Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks a million, Danielle. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.